vodim sektor za spodbujanje internacionalizacije na Spirit Slovenija. V imenu agencije vas prav lepo pozdravljam. Z mano je danes tudi Martin, ki je na naši strani organiziral tale seminar. Sicer ga organiziramo v sodelovanju z Veleposlaništvom Republike Slovenije v Londonu in pa vladno administracijo Združenega kraljestva. Z nami so predstavniki Ministrstva za poslovanje, energetiko in industrijsko politiko. Verjetno veste, da na Spirit Slovenija izvajamo različne aktivnosti v podporo slovenskim podjetjem pri izvoznem poslovanju. Poleg našega rednega informiranja o aktualnih temah in priložnostih na tujih trgih preko portala Izvozno okno pripravljamo seminarje, kot je današnji, izobraževalne programe in številne poslovne dogodke v tujini s ciljem seveda promocije slovenskega gospodarstva in predvsem vzpostavljanja poslovnih stikov med slovenskimi in tujimi podjetji. Danes nadaljujemo z serijo aktivnosti, ki jih z različnimi partnerji organiziramo na temo poslovanja v Veliki Britaniji. Slednja je ob izstopu iz Evropske unije na področju trgovanja, prostega pretoka blaga vzpostavila lastno ureditev, in uvedla to oznako UKCA, ki je pričela veljati z dnem njihovega izstopa iz Evropske unije, se pravi s 1.1.2021. Zdaj v večini primerov se oznaka CE na trgu Velike Britanije lahko uporablja še do 31.12., potem pa bo potreba preiti na drugo certificiranje. Več podrobnosti nam bosta predstavila naša današnja gosta. In predno vam jo predstavim in dam besedo, naj omenim, da bomo današnjo predstavitev snemali. Posnetek bo na voljo na izvoznem oknu. Kar se tiče vaših vprašanj, predlagamo, da jih vpišete v pogovorno okno, v chat in bosta gosta potem odgovarjala sproti oziroma na koncu njunih prezentacij. Eno prošnjo bi imela, zato tudi zdajle tale pozdrav v slovenskem jeziku. Na Spirit Slovenija in na Ministrstvo za gospodarstvo bi želeli malo bolj razumeti, kako velik je izziv za slovenska podjetja, kako velik izziv predstavlja zdaj ta Brexit, vse te nove regulative, kako bi mogoče lahko še s kakšnimi drugimi ukrepi vam tudi pomagali v prihodnje pri poslovanju oziroma pri, kako naj temu rečem, pri tem vaših načrtih in poslovanju na tujih trgih v Veliki Britaniji. Mi vam bomo poslali zdaj v prihodnjih dneh, jaz mislim, da kar kmalu, en vprašalnik, preko katerega bomo sicer prosili tudi za informacijo, povratno informacijo o tem, kako koristne so bile te informacije, ki ste jih dobili danes, ampak predvsem pa bomo dodali ene par vprašanj o tem, kakšni so zdaj te vaši izzivi vezani na poslovanje z Veliko Britanijo. Se pravi, vse tiste, ki že poslujete v Veliki Britaniji in nameravate poslovati v Veliki Britaniji, bi prosili, če nam lahko odgovorite na ene par vprašanj, da vidimo, kako lahko še našo pomoč v zvezi z Brexitom organiziramo. Now let's switch into English, right? So with great pleasure, I welcome Ms. Erin Fair and Mr. Ahmed Jama, representatives of the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy at the United Kingdom government. Thank you very much for your initiative in organizing today's presentation and for being here with us. So no other words needed. Ms. Fair, the word is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having us. And thank you to everybody who's attending today. I'm just going to pull up my slides first. And of course, it will take a bit of time. All right, can everybody see those okay?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. As we said, my name is Erin Fair, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the UKCA and UKNI markings and what steps that you guys as businesses need to take to comply with the new rules of the UKCA marking regime. So we're very excited to be here today. First thing that I want to do is give you an overview of what we're going to cover and a little bit about today's session. So our aim of today is to first give you an overview of what's required to begin using the UKCA and UKNI marks. So we're going to outline the steps you need to take to ensure that the goods you're selling to the GB and NI markets are compliant when you're making those, when that marking requirement comes into effect. So I do need to note that we don't have time today to cover every single situation that could occur. And also, as the Department for Business, Energy, and Industrial Strategy, we can't advise you about specific or individual circumstances. However, we've had some pre-submitted questions, and we are going to have time for a question and answer session at the end. So as we go through this, I do encourage you guys to pop your questions into the chat. If you've not used Teams before, you'll have an option to open the chat window on the top of the screen. And I'll get to those questions at the end of the session. So do want to let you know that also we're going to be sharing these slides after the presentation. These do include links to further guidance and some additional resources at the end that are going to be useful for you. So first, we'll get started by talking about an overview of what the UKCA mark is and where it applies and the key dates that you're going to need to know when it comes into effect. So first, the UKCA marking applies to all of the goods which previously required the CE marking or the reversed epsilon marking. Now, this is the new product marking for Great Britain, which includes the countries of England, Scotland, and Wales. And just very quickly, can I remind you guys that if you're, could you please turn yourselves on mute? We're getting some computer noises there. So, important thing to note about where the marking applies is that there are different arrangements in place for Northern Ireland, which is highlighted in red on the map that you see on the screen. So you can continue using the CE marking if your good is self-assessed or if you use an EU notified body to assess your product within Northern Ireland. However, if your product for Northern Ireland is being assessed by a UK notified body, which would be the case that if you have operations within the UK possibly, then you will need to use the CE plus UK NI marking. Just important to note that the UK NI marking, if you're using it, it will never be used on its own. It will always have the CE plus UK NI marking or the UKCA plus UK NI. Important to note, the CE plus UK NI marking is not accepted on the EU market. So since the 1st of January 2021, the essential requirements and standards that we use to demonstrate compliance for what we call new approach goods, which are covered by the UKCA, these have all remained the same. So, for example, if you previously self-declared when you've been using the CE marking, you can also do that for the UKCA marking. You can also use both the CE and UKCA markings on the same product, as long as that product meets the requirements for each of those markings separately. This also applies if your product requires third-party conformity assessment testing. If it's required that for the CE, then it will for the UKCA. And just in general, the responsible authority for enforcement in the UK remains the UK Trading Standards Body. So on this slide, you're going to see a list of the product areas that are covered by the UKCA marking. This includes also measuring instruments, radio equipment, and eco designs. So there, it is important to note, and I will mention this a couple of times, that there are special rules in place for medical devices, also rail interoperability, also construction products, and civil explosives. Now, if your product does not fall under any of these product areas that are on the screen, and you're unable to find specific legislation that's relevant to your product, we suggest you check the A to Z of industry guidance, which I'm going to have a link to at the end of this presentation. We do advise you to check the general product safety regulations page as well. Also, we advise you to speak to your trade association or to seek legal advice just to ensure that your good is going to be compliant when you're placing it on the market in GB. So the first step that you need to do is to work out which rules apply to your products. So businesses need to also consider whether you need to do anything else. This might include getting new approval for your products or appointing a new authorized representative. You might need to make your supply chain aware of new duties that they have, or understanding and making required changing to your marking and labeling. So again, I'm going to review more of these in the coming slides in more detail, but I would like to encourage you to visit our guidance pages on .gov.uk. So want to give you a reminder of the key dates that are going to matter to you in the implementation of the UKCA marking. So the most important one of these is the 31st of December of this year, 2022. This is the last day when most products, except medical devices, must have the UKCA marking after this point, so from the 1st of January. The rules for medical devices recognize the CE mark for longer. So you'll have an additional 6 months until the 30th of June 2023 to begin using the UKCA mark before it's required. Please do note that these are the final deadlines. We are strongly encouraging you to begin preparing as soon as possible, particularly if your good requires third-party testing. Now, until the end of 2023, we do have a labeling easement in place. And what that means is that you can apply the UKCA marking using a sticky label, either on the good or on an accompanying document. However, after 31st of December of 2023, that marking is going to need to be applied directly onto the product, unless your product-specific legislation states otherwise, which is why it's really important that you check out the A to Z guide. So I'm now going to define what we mean when we say placing a good on the GB or NI markets, because it's a really important concept that a lot of rules are based on. So placing a good on the market refers to an individual, fully manufactured good when it's first made available for distribution, consumption, or use on the GB market, sort of in the course of commercial activity. So again, this refers to each individual good. It's not a type of good, so it needs to be individually identifiable by something like a serial number. And to prove that you've placed a product on the market, you can use documents that you'd normally use in business transactions. So this could include like an invoice or a contract of sale. Now, under legislation, the only economic operators who can place goods on the market are manufacturers and importers. Now, when a manufacturer or importer supplies a good to a distributor or to an end user in GB for the first time, that's when a good gets considered placed on the market. Now, any subsequent operation is defined as making available. Now, that will be important, especially if you're working around machinery regulations. So when a good is made available, it must comply with the legal requirements that were in place at the time it was placed on the market. Again, there's some machinery legislation that refers to the term putting into service as well, which takes place the first time a good is being used in GB by the end user for its intended purpose. Now, if legislation uses both terms of placing on the market and putting into service, then the UKCA requirements need to be met before either of the two happen. All right. So this slide is just a summary of the process that you will need to follow in order to get the UKCA marking on your goods and those goods onto the GB market. So once you've established whether you'll need the UKCA marking, you then need to check the route for conformity assessment. Now, this is whether you can self-declare or if you need to have your product tested. This will typically be the same requirement as it is for when you're using the CE marking too. So then you must get your products tested or follow the procedures for self-declaration, and this includes keeping the relevant documentation. You then need to apply the UKCA marking to your product, and again, I'll cover this in a bit more detail. Once you have followed the appropriate procedures and place the UKCA marking on your products, you can then place your good onto the market. So I've mentioned the term economic operators a couple times now, so I'm going to define those and talk about what their roles and responsibilities are. So first, it's important to check whether your legal responsibilities have changed as of the 1st of January 2021. Essentially, mainly because if you were previously a distributor within the EU single market in your operations with the UK, you may now be considered an importer in the UK and vice versa. So as in the EU, importers have more responsibilities than distributors. Also, if you used an authorized representative, they can no longer be based in the EU. And by authorized representative, that's the same as a responsible person. So they can't be based in the EU for the GB market and vice versa. It's also important to note that within UKCA regulations, an authorized representative is usually optional. It's very rare that we specify that you must have one, and if we do, it will be listed in those product-specific regulations. So one EU rule to be aware of is that as of the 16th of July in 2021, new regulation came into effect, which means that you may need to appoint an EU authorized representative if there's no other economic operator in place. So this is when exporting to the EU or to Northern Ireland. Again, please consult the gov.uk guidance pages and the EU Commission guidance for more information regarding this. Now, so this is just defining what the key economic operators are. And so I'll just quickly run through these. Now, a manufacturer is someone who manufactures a product or has a product designed and manufactured, which they then advertise for sale under their own name or trademark. Now, you're an importer you're an importer if you are the first person to place goods on the market from an external market. So it's important to note that importer definitions for goods regulation does vary from the definition that is used for customs. So in UK regulations, the customs definition for an importer is much broader. For our purposes, and talking about placing goods on the market, an importer only is restricted to anyone who brings third country products into a given market and supplies it on the GB market. So that's the definition we'll be sticking with today. A distributor is a person other than the manufacturer or importer who makes goods available on the market. And finally, an authorized representative is a person who is legally appointed by the manufacturer to undertake specific tasks on their behalf. And again, authorized representatives, most often optional, but check your product-specific legislation to be sure. Now, I mentioned that importers often have more responsibilities, and one of those is importer labeling. So again, you're an importer if you're the first person to place those goods on the market in GB. And again, placing that good on a market refers to when the good is first made available for sale in the GB market. So really think about when it's made available for sale and purchase by those GB customers. So because the EU is now an external market to Great Britain, it means that you may be an importer when you were previously a distributor. If you are an importer, you must label the goods that you have imported with your contact details. So this includes your name, the registered trademark or trademark of your business, and the postal address of your trademark on the good. Now, usually just a number and a street name and a postcode will suffice as the postal address, that plus your trading name, but you do need to put those details on if you're an importer. So to make this easier for businesses, we are allowing you guys to provide these details on packaging or on an accompanying document until the end of this year. And that's also for certain goods that come from the EEA, and in some cases Switzerland, where EU legislation is implemented. Again, this is why I keep saying it's really important to check the regulations that apply to your specific goods. From the 1st of January 2023, you will have to attach these details directly to the products. Unless if your good is too small to reasonably affix either the importer contact details or the UKCA marking. Some goods are very, very small. You can then attach it to accompanying documentation. So we do have a practical way of looking at that. Again, certain legislation may also specifically allow that you put these details on the packaging or on accompanying documentation. So again, important to check the legislation. So I'm now going to talk about the routes to conformity assessment. And again, the various actions that you guys are going to need to take in order to place your goods on the GB market. So the first one route is self-assessment. Now, in the GB market, you can self-declare for the UKCA mark in the same way as you would for the CE mark. However, again, encourage you to check out the specific rules. But in general, if you have been self-assessing for the CE mark, you can continue doing so for the UKCA. And same requirement goes for third-party conformity assessment testing. Now, in the Northern Ireland market, self-declaration also remains unchanged, and you'll then therefore continue to follow EU rules when selling to Northern Ireland. So the second route to assessment is third-party assessment. Any goods that are placed on the market in GB that require third-party testing will now need to be tested by a UK-based assessment body. These third-party assessment bodies are also referred to as notified bodies in the EU, so they're essentially the same. When all UK notified bodies have now automatically become UK approved bodies. So it really is just a change in terminology. Sorry, the main difference between a UK approved body and an EU notified body is that the approved bodies can test for the UKCA marking for the GB market. However, they cannot test for the CE marking for the EU market. Now, we have a list of all of the approved bodies that are within the UK on what we call the UKMCAB database. I can provide a link in the chat after I've finished up with this, in case you're not aware of it, because that's where we have everybody you can get assessed by. Please note that there are still notified bodies for Northern Ireland market, because the Northern Ireland market follows EU rules. So as a general reminder, just keep that in mind. So in Northern Ireland, they will refer to them as notified bodies, and you will continue using them just as you would in any other part of Europe if you're having them tested there. Now, in the Northern Ireland market, again, you can either apply the CE or the UKNI plus CE marking to demonstrate compliance. To certify for the CE mark, use an EU notified body. You can still continue to find those on the NANDO database. All right. So documentation. I want to review what you guys need to, the documentation that you'll need to keep to show that your product is conforming to those regulatory requirements. This might be requested at any time by market surveillance authorities. And the information you must keep depends on the specific legislation that applies to your product and which economic operator you are in the supply chain. So this includes, there's the technical file, and that covers how the product is designed and manufactured, how it's been shown to conform to the relevant requirements, and it gives the addresses of the manufacturer and any storage facilities. A UK declaration of conformity should include a declaration that the product conforms to the relevant requirements and has the name and address of the manufacturer. The UK Declaration of Conformity is similar to the EU Declaration of Conformity, and we're oftentimes asked if you can use the same Declaration of Conformity for both the UK and the EU. There's no rule against this, but we strongly recommend that you have separate certificates for both markets and that you do this well in advance of the 1st of January 2023. So I'm now going to give you a bit of information about placing manufactured goods on the Northern Ireland market. Now, from a regulatory perspective only, I'm not going to be talking about customs or tariffs or any other arrangements. So goods will need to meet EU regulatory requirements to be placed on the market in Northern Ireland, and this is for as long as the Northern Ireland Protocol is in force. Because Northern Ireland continues to align with EU rules, it means that the CE marking is going to continue to be the conformity marking for most of the new approach goods that are in Northern Ireland. You'll continue using the CE marking there if you self-declare, or if you use an EU notified body to carry out any mandatory conformity assessment. Now, products which have had mandatory conformity assessment by a UK notified body, UK-based notified body, cannot be placed on the market in any of the 27 EU member states. In this case, you need to have the CE plus UKNI marking to be sold in Northern Ireland. Now, again, that UKNI marking is if you're having your goods assessed from a UK-based approved body. If you guys are having your goods assessed over here in Slovenia, then you'll just continue using your EU notified body, and you can export to Northern Ireland as you would any of the other EU member states. Sorry, excuse me there. So, all right. Now, I want to talk a bit about the importer responsibilities because it's important to review those specifically for Northern Ireland. So, as with responsibilities for importers and distributors between Great Britain and the EU, there are different responsibilities for those in the Northern Ireland supply chain. If you bring items into Northern Ireland from the United Kingdom or another non-EEA country and place them on the Northern Ireland market, then you are an importer. So to place goods on the Northern Ireland market for the first time, an importer will need to be in either Northern Ireland or the EU or in the EEA, again, because Northern Ireland continues to follow EU rules. And currently, if there are no importers in place in Northern Ireland, then an authorized representative is required for your goods under the relevant EU product legislation. That authorized representative must be based in Northern Ireland or in the EEA. And if you place goods on the market in Great Britain from outside the UK, including a business based in Northern Ireland, For example, if you have goods supplied to a Northern Ireland business from the EU, and these goods are then seen as crossing, if you place goods supplied from Northern Ireland business from the EU, then those goods are seen as crossing from outside the UK into the GB market if you send those from Northern Ireland to GB. In this case, the business based in Northern Ireland would be an importer, and the goods would need to be labeled with the importer details of the Northern Ireland-based business. So this isn't a situation that many businesses may run into, but it is very important that we make it known for those of you who are doing business with Northern Ireland that there are these separate sets of rules with that. All of this is based around the UK's commitment to unfettered access for Northern Ireland goods. So as long as that protocol is in place, and it's generally quite easy to keep up with what's going on with the protocol just by checking the news, because it does make the news. But again, keep an eye on this. It's very important, especially if you do business with them. And I've got some routes to assessment. Oh, sorry. So bit of extra support, available resources that we have for you guys. So we are doing our best to offer you guys all sorts of routes to information as we go along with this and as our guidance continues to be updated. So keep saying that the first step is to understand the A to Z of goods. Now, this is why we're also going to be sending the webinars out, is because there are links within these slides that you will be able to click through. We do have a webinar series that is being run continually. It's published on gov.uk, and there's a link on that page that you'll be able to follow. We are looking at doing some sector-specific webinars as well, so on things like construction products and hopefully medical devices. So keep an eye on that page because the offering will be updated regularly. Now, I have been saying over and over again that you need to check the product-specific rules that apply to your goods. And on this page is a QR code that will take you to our A to Z of industry guidance. Now, if you've not used a QR code before, if you just open up your camera app on your smartphone and you just hold it over that code, you don't have to zoom in super close or anything, but a link will pop up or a little thing for you to click on the screen. Click that through and that will take you to the guidance. And then that's a really great starting place. And then finally, as I said, our guidance continues to be updated. We are constantly thinking about how we can make the UKCA and UKNI marks easier for businesses to use. We want to have practical implementation of this. And so we really encourage you to sign up we are now offering guidance update alerts. So if we publish new guidance or new guidance products, you'll receive an alert the day that it happens, which is the best thing to do. So if you can open up your camera app again, hold it over that QR code because it's different. This will also give you the chance to get our newsletter, which we're only doing every other month. But that's going to be based on what frequently asked questions we're hearing from you guys at those times. And again, we'll just give you some more additional information on any recent alerts. So really encourage you to sign up for this. Right? So more help as well. We also have an inbox. A goods regulation at bays.gov.uk is a way that you can ask us questions. We aim to get back to folks within 2 weeks, but it does depend on what our workload is like because it's shared amongst my team. But yeah, please feel free to get in touch with that. Remember, we can't give advice on specific instances, but we can point you in the right direction and give you some more info. I've also included a couple of flowcharts on here that will help you to follow how to get your goods assessed and placed on the market. So give you a chance to review those once you've had those. But I'm going to stop right now and I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Ahmed Jama from our Rules of Origin team. Thank you so much. And Ahmed, it's your turn.
Thanks very much, Erin. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Ahmed, and I work on the Rules of Origin team in the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. I hope everyone's having a good morning so far. So I'm just going to share my slide deck, and I just need confirmation if you guys can see. Has that appeared? Yep.
You're good.
Fantastic. All right then, so I'll get started. So again, good morning everyone. My name is Ahmed. I work on the Rules of Origin team over here in Bays in the UK. So thank you for having me, excuse me, and my colleague Erin here with you to discuss how to move your goods to the UK. And I'll be covering the Rules of Origin segment of this session with you today. So before we begin, I'd just like to mention that some of you may export a very broad products which may not be able to be answered today due to the specifics of the questions that you may answer. So I would be grateful if you can put the questions in the chat if you have any, so we can take them away to the relevant colleagues in Whitehall if we can't answer them via this session today. So with that said, let's begin. So just going to cover over briefly what rules of origin are. Some of you may be aware, but for those who are not, rules of origin determine the economic nationality of a good, so namely where its parts come from and the processing used in its making. And this is relevant to all free trade agreements, but bear in mind that each agreement differs, and despite similarities between them, a trader has to refer to the provisions applying to the one relevant to the export destination. So you, depending on where you're exporting your products, you would have to look at the relevant provisions within the free trade agreement applicable to that product. So therefore, in this presentation, I will set out the types of rules that you may come across and that you would need to comply with, and the documentation required under the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which would be applicable for yourselves. So I'm just going to go over the difference between distribution and production, as it's really important to touch on what we mean by this. Goods imported into Great Britain, which have cleared customs, cannot be circulated freely in the EU member states. And this also works the other way around as well, so vice versa. So to be eligible for zero tariff exports, these goods must still comply with rules of origin. And I say Great Britain because, of course, we have a slightly different arrangement with Northern Ireland, which I won't go through today, but just wanted to mention to avoid any confusion. Now, there are two ways to ensure that goods do not need to pay a tariff. So the first way is if goods don't go into free circulation. So basically what that means is that they do not leave customs control. So to add here, the UK and EU also both apply duty relief for returns goods. So that may be an option for some traders. And there's some guidance available on gov.uk, which we can share at the end of the presentation. And the second way is to qualify under rules of origin, which will be mainly the topic of this presentation. So this means that there must be a qualifying level of production in either the UK or EU before the goods is exported. So to access zero tariffs, what this means is you cannot import a finished product from the EU to the UK or the other way around and simply distribute it or re-export it without any processing taking place. And I can go through this point in more detail in the later slides. So how to comply with the rules of origin. Now, there are 3 steps to work out whether your goods comply with rules of origin and that your goods are eligible for zero tariffs. The first is to classify your goods for purposes of customs. The second is to understand whether your goods meet the applicable rules of origin. And then the third would be to understand how to demonstrate origin to the customs authority and documents you need to include with your goods when you export them. So you can choose to use a customs agent to help you with rules of origin. So this essentially is someone who handles all the documentation and classifies your goods for you. And there is guidance available on how to find a customs agent on gov.uk, which I can share at the end of the presentation as well. So moving on to the next slide. So classifying goods for trade. So for the purposes of international trade, all goods have to be classified under something called the harmonized system, which is an internationally standardized system to identify goods. And the harmonized system forms the first 6 digits, typically, of a 10-digit classification code when importing goods into the UK. So essentially, the more digits that a particular product has, the more detail it has when describing that particular good. And products are categorized into chapters, headings, and subheadings. So for example, we can take a t-shirt, which would be under chapter 61, which is typically textile products. Expanding this to the 4-digit level would be the HS heading 6109 and would further detail the product and classify it as a t-shirt. And the 6-digit level would add more detail, which would include what the t-shirt is made out of. So in this case, it would be a cotton t-shirt. And you can use the trade tariff lookup tool to classify your goods. And the EU has its own tariff checker tool as well, which is called Tariff, which you may be familiar with. And so does the UK as well, called the UK tariff checker tool. And I can share the link to both at the end of the presentation so that you can access it and classify your goods with those tools. So understanding whether your goods meet the applicable rules of origin. So an important detail to mention is that all suppliers need to know where materials or inputs come from, whether it be within the UK or EU or imported from other countries. And there are rules for different products known as product-specific rules. And businesses will need to work out whether their products comply using the classification from step 1 that I covered in the previous slide. The specific rules for each product is listed in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. And to find your product, you can either use the EU or gov.uk online tariff tool that I covered. Then you would refer back to the Trade and Cooperation Agreement document in order to find which rule of origin applies to your product specifically. And to highlight, there are 4 types that you can see on the screen for which your product may need to comply with and will fall under. And the first that I'll cover is the wholly obtained rule. So this is basically a rule that says if a product is fully grown, born or extracted from the UK or EU, it is considered wholly obtained and is eligible for 0 tariffs. And this normally applies to agricultural products like vegetables, but could also apply to mineral products that are extracted from the soil as well. Next is the change in tariff code. So this means that all non-UK or EU inputs must be classified in a different harmonized system code to the final product that is exported. This can apply at a chapter, heading or subheading level, and this can be easier for businesses to prove, as all you really need to do is make sure that the classification of your inputs and their origin change when exporting that good. And the third type is the value added rule, also known as the maximum non-originating content rule. So this basically explains that if a rule requires a maximum level of non-originating material, then a certain amount of that value of the final product must be generated in either the UK or the EU. And this can include EU originating parts or value added in the production, such as labor or manufacturing costs. And the threshold depends on the product, and it normally is typically around the 40 to 60% range. And finally, the final rule that I'll cover is the specific processing rule. So this illustrates that some rules, such as chemicals, products, or anything of the like, would have to go through a specific operation or set of procedures in place, either in the UK or in the EU, for that product to be classified as UK or EU originating. So for example, take a chemical product, for instance. A chemical reaction must either take place in the UK or the EU for it to be originating from that particular place. So I'll put this into an example. And this would be a typical example that you would find as outlined in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. So this particular example is an auto part, which is normally placed in Chapter 87 of the Harmonized System. With key automotive parts such as engines and batteries classified in chapters either 84 or 85. And rules for most auto parts use the change in tariff heading rule, meaning that any non-originating inputs must come from a different 4-digit classification code to that of the final product, or there could be another rule that can apply, which is the 50% maximum non-originating material rule, meaning that the non-originating content used in the manufacture of a product of this particular product cannot be more than 50%. So essentially what that means is that the threshold cannot go beyond 50%, so it has to be under 50%. And another way to put it in more context is, for example, take a transmission shaft manufactured in the EU. It's classified under 84, 83 of the harmonized system. The rule of origin for the transmission shaft requires any non-originating input to come from a different 4-digit heading to the final product. And that means that any input classified in heading 84, 83 must ultimately be below the 50% non-originating threshold in terms of its final export price, or the final product is a different HS code to the input used to produce the good. And then I can expand this into a different example. So in this case, textiles and clothing products. So which is normally classified in the chapters 50 to 63, if I'm not mistaken, of the harmonized system. So rules in these sectors vary by product, but mainly have specific processing rules, which require a specific manufacturing process to take place, as I covered in the previous slide, either in the UK or in the EU to qualify for zero tariffs. So for example, a cotton t-shirt produced in the EU must be knitted or crocheted and made up in the UK or EU to meet the rules of origin. So I wanted to go through in this section and briefly touch on what bilateral accumulation is. And bilateral accumulation allows you to use both UK and EU inputs towards meeting the rules of origin for a manufactured good. So for example, if making a car in the EU, bilateral accumulation would allow you to use a UK originating engine and count it as an EU engine for the purposes of rules of origin. And to do this, you must show that the processing goes beyond insufficient production. So for example, things like putting on labels, packaging, cleaning, washing a product for simple assembly of parts do not count as sufficient production. In the next few slides, I will go over a few examples on what this looks like in practice. As we covered before, each product-specific rule describes the nature or value of processing that must be carried out on any materials that do not originate in the country of export. And the processing of these materials must go beyond the list of minor processing, known as insufficient production, as I mentioned in the previous slide. And as mentioned in the last slide, examples include insufficient things such as labels, cleaning, polishing, etc. And a full list can be found in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement itself. I'll just go through an example of what this looks like in practice. So the first in this example is a piece of clay that's imported from the Far East, which will then be processed into a mug in the EU for export into the UK. So the clay will normally go through sufficient processing that is beyond simple and will meet the product-specific rule for a mug in the EU, which is a change in tariff heading rule, meaning that the clay, which is in one code, has to change to another code. So it has to transform from the clay to a mug, which will be a different classification code. And it has to change on the 4-digit level. And as a result, this ceramic mug would qualify as it has met the sufficient processing required in the EU and will qualify for tariff-free access into the UK. Whereas take the opposite example at the bottom there. So this essentially illustrates that the mug is then imported into the EU from a Far East country. So for example, Vietnam, and its classification code is 6911. And all that happens in the EU is that the mug is then printed on. So a logo could be printed on the mug, or it's boxed up and it gets exported to the UK. And this would not qualify as sufficient processing under the rules in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, as it has not met the sufficient processing for it to qualify for zero tariffs. And here I'll go through another example. So this example is a t-shirt, which is a textile product to make into a cotton t-shirt. So To make this t-shirt, the cotton is spun, knitted, dyed, cut and finished in the EU and is then exported to the UK. And this t-shirt will meet the sufficient processing requirement, which is illustrated in the product-specific rule in the TCA agreement, so the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, as it's gone through the sufficient processing, so the spinning of the cotton, the knitting, the dyeing, and the cutting of the particular product. And again, we can illustrate another example where it would not classify as sufficient processing. So the t-shirt in and of itself is just imported, and again, similarly to the mug example, it goes through very simple processing and then is exported to the UK market. And upon import, it would be charged tax because it had not met the rules of origin in the TCA agreement and has not gone through the sufficient processing to meet the rules. So I just wanted to go through very briefly on how to prove to customs authorities that your goods qualify. So essentially, to access zero tariffs under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, you will need to claim preferences as part of your customs declaration. And under the terms of the TCA agreement, preference is claimed via a statement of origin or importer's knowledge. So it's two options that you can choose from when proving origin for your products. So essentially what that is just evidence that your goods are originating. So a statement of origin, as illustrated on the right-hand side that you can see on the slide there, should be provided by the exporter on a document such as an invoice or a bill of material. And another method is to use importer's knowledge. And to use importer's knowledge, you will need to obtain sufficient evidence that the goods meet the rules of origin. And this may essentially involve the exporter providing a range of supporting documentation. So, for example, previous invoices that you may hold electronically. And you can keep these documents electronically, and it cannot be no more than 4 years old. So as long as it's within the 4-year range that you've got the proof there, then you can use importer's knowledge to prove that your goods are originating. And just to briefly touch on supplier's declaration, so there may be instances where you need to prove via your supply chain that your goods meet the rules of origin. And this would be done through a supplier's declaration. And a supplier's declaration is used to prove to customs authorities that, again, your goods are originating. So at the time, you may need to provide evidence from your suppliers, and they would normally provide this to you at your request. And this would be in the form of the documentation that you see and the layout of the documentation that you see on the right-hand side of the slides there. So that's just an example of what one would look like. So within the specific columns, it will have what is originating and what's not originating within your finished good. So the supply declarations would be needed if requested by the customs official at the point of claiming preference. And this is all illustrated within the agreement. So the TCA agreement in and of itself. And if you do have any questions, or if you need to go through what exactly a supply declaration is and an explanation of this in more detail, then there is a webinar that we've produced, which we can share the link to and the QR code as well, that you can watch in your own time. So briefly, I'm just going to touch on the UK-Turkey agreement, as we've been made aware that this is very relevant to yourselves. So in terms of the UK and the Turkey agreement, this would be under the revised Rules of Origin Protocol in the agreement, which came into effect in the UK in April 2021, and is a rollover based on the arrangement that the EU have currently. And the aim of this was to ensure that the customs continuity would not be disturbed when the UK left the EU. So essentially what this means is that the rules of origin provisions found in the UK agreement with Turkey will be similar as the rules of origin found in the EU-Turkey agreement. And we can answer any questions on this arrangement where we can, but can always take away questions if we can't answer any of your questions today. So as mentioned throughout the presentation, we've got various different links which may be useful to yourselves, and we've got webinars available on rules of origin which you can watch over in your own time and at your leisure, and also a detailed breakdown of supply declarations on where one would apply and where it would not apply. So various different links for you to access and to go through in your own time. And I shall stop right there and take any questions if you have any. So thank you very much for your time and listening.